Maria had always lived a simple life. She worked as a maid in the grand house of Maestro Lorenzo, one of the most famous piano conductors in the city. Every morning, before the sun rose, she would tie her hair into a bun, pack a small lunch, and walk miles to the mansion. The marble floors, golden chandeliers, and framed photos of famous musicians on the walls reminded her of a world far beyond her reach. Yet, she worked quietly, dusting the furniture, polishing the piano, and keeping everything spotless. Maria's daughter, Isabella, was just 12 years old. She was a bright, curious girl with soft brown eyes and a gentle smile. Since Maria couldn't afford to leave her alone at home, Isabella often came with her mother to the mansion after school. While Maria cleaned the hallways, Isabella would sit quietly in a corner of the grand music room, doing her homework or reading old music magazines she found in the bins. But what truly fascinated her was the grand piano that stood in the center of the room. It was shiny, elegant, and powerful, like a magical instrument that could speak without words. Every afternoon, Maestro Lorenzo's students came for their lessons. They were all children from rich families, wearing polished shoes and expensive clothes. They played beautiful melodies while their parents watched proudly from the chairs. Isabella would sit quietly, her eyes following every movement of the maestro's hands. She listened carefully as he corrected the students, teaching them about rhythm, tone, and feeling. She didn't understand every word, but the music spoke to her heart in a way words never could. Sometimes, when the students took a break, Isabella would sneak closer to the piano. She would touch the keys lightly, feeling the smoothness under her fingers. But she never dared to play a note. The piano belonged to the maestro, and she knew her place. Yet, in her mind, she could already hear the melodies she wished to play one day. Maria often noticed her daughter staring at the instrument. "Don't get too close, Bella," she would whisper gently. "That's not for us." Isabella would nod, though her heart ached every time she walked away. She knew her mother worked hard just to keep food on the table, and music lessons were something they could never afford. Still, every time she heard the notes fill the house, she felt something awaken inside her. A dream she didn't yet understand. One evening, after the lessons were over and everyone had gone home, Maria stayed late to finish cleaning. Isabella sat nearby, humming softly to herself. The maestro had left the piano lid open. The sight tempted her again. She looked around, no one was there. Quietly, she walked over and pressed one key. The sound echoed through the empty hall, soft but magical. She smiled, then pressed another, and another, until she began to form a small tune. She didn't know what she was doing, but somehow, it sounded right. Her mother looked up and was about to scold her, but when she heard the melody, she froze. It was sweet and gentle, as if the piano itself was speaking. At that moment, Maestro Lorenzo entered the room unexpectedly. He had forgotten his briefcase and returned to get it. When he heard the piano, he stopped by the door, surprised. He expected to see one of his students, but instead saw the maid's daughter playing with her eyes closed. For a moment, he simply watched. There was no fear or hesitation in her hands, only pure emotion. When Isabella opened her eyes and saw him standing there, she gasped and jumped away from the piano. "I am sorry, sir," she stammered. Her face turned pale with fear. Maria quickly bowed and said, "Please forgive her, Maestro. She didn't mean to." Lorenzo raised his hand to silence them. He walked slowly toward the piano and looked at Isabella. "Where did you learn that piece?" he asked sternly. Isabella shook her head. "I didn't learn it. I just played what I heard," she whispered. The maestro stared at her for a moment, not knowing what to say. Finally, he muttered, "Interesting. You have a good ear for a maid's child." His tone was cold but curious. Then he turned and left, leaving the two of them standing there in silence. That night, as they walked home, Isabella couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. She was embarrassed but also excited. For the first time, she had touched the piano, and it felt like touching her destiny. Maria, though still worried, looked at her daughter and saw something different in her eyes. There was a spark, a quiet determination. She realized that maybe her daughter was meant for something far greater than cleaning houses. But neither of them knew that this small, forbidden moment would one day change their lives forever. After that night, Isabella couldn't stop thinking about the piano. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the melodies she had played echoing in her mind. Something inside her had awakened, a love for music that she couldn't explain. While other children her age played outside or chatted with friends, Isabella's heart belonged to the sound of piano keys. She dreamed of playing like the students she saw at Maestro Lorenzo's mansion, but deep down, she knew it was impossible. Her mother was a maid. They barely had enough money for rent and food, let alone music lessons. Still, every day after school, Isabella went with her mother to the mansion. She would finish her homework quietly while the Maestro students practiced in the grand hall. She listened carefully to every song, memorizing how each note sounded. When a student made a mistake, she instantly knew it. Sometimes, she even whispered the correct note under her breath. She didn't have books or teachers, her only lessons came from listening. One evening, as Maria was dusting the piano room, Isabella sat in her usual corner, pretending to read. Maestro Lorenzo was giving a lesson to one of his most talented students, a teenage boy named Adrian. The piece was Chopin's Nocturne. The music was soft and emotional, but Adrian kept missing the rhythm. Lorenzo sighed heavily. "No, no, no. Feel it. You must feel the sadness in the notes," he said, frustrated. Adrian tried again but still couldn't get it right. Finally, Lorenzo ended the session early and left, shaking his head. When everyone was gone, Isabella looked at her mother. Maria gave her a tired smile. "Let's finish up quickly, Bella," she said. But Isabella's eyes were fixed on the piano. "Mama, can I just try it once?" she whispered. Maria hesitated. "No, Isabella. You remember what happened last time." The maestro was not happy, but Isabella pleaded softly, "Please, Mama, just once. I won't break anything." Seeing the hope in her daughter's eyes, Maria finally nodded. Isabella sat at the piano, her small fingers hovering over the keys. She remembered every sound she had heard earlier. Then, slowly, she began to play the same nocturne that Adrian had struggled with. The notes were not perfect, but they carried emotion, pure and real. The music filled the empty hall, gentle yet powerful. Maria stood frozen, her broom still in hand, tears glistening in her eyes. What Isabella didn't know was that Maestro Lorenzo had returned. He had forgotten his music sheet and walked back into the room quietly. When he heard the piano, he paused outside the door, surprised again. It was that same maid's daughter, the little girl with no lessons, no training, and no privilege. Yet, she played with more heart than his best students. Her timing was not flawless, but every note carried feeling. When she finished, Lorenzo stepped forward. "Who taught you that piece?" he asked, his voice calm but curious. Isabella jumped in shock. She quickly stood up and said, "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to." But Lorenzo interrupted. "Answer me. Who taught you?" Isabella hesitated. "No one, sir. I just listen when you teach." The maestro raised an eyebrow. "So you played Chopin's Nocturne just by listening?" She nodded shyly. For a moment he said nothing. Then, a faint smile appeared on his face, though his tone remained firm. "Impressive. But remember, talent without discipline is nothing. Go help your mother now." As he walked away, Maria looked at her daughter with pride and fear mixed in her heart. She knew Isabella was special, but she also knew that their world was not kind to poor dreamers. "You must be careful, my child," she whispered. "People may not like it when someone like us dares to dream." That night, Isabella couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing the piano in her mind. She didn't have a piano of her own, so she practiced silently, pressing invisible keys on her blanket. She remembered every sound, every note, every mistake she had made earlier. She promised herself that next time, she would play it perfectly. Days turned into weeks, and every chance she got, she practiced secretly after the lessons ended. Sometimes, she was caught by the guards and scolded. Other times, she escaped unnoticed. Her passion only grew stronger. She began to understand the music not by reading notes, but by feeling emotions, sadness, hope, love, and longing. She didn't just play songs. She told stories through them. Isabella didn't know it yet, but word about the maid's daughter who played like a prodigy had quietly reached the maestro's ears more than once. He didn't stop her. In fact, he began leaving music sheets open on the piano whenever he left the room, as if testing her curiosity. He told himself it was just amusement, but deep down he was fascinated. There was something about her gift, raw, emotional, and natural, that reminded him why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. For Isabella, it was the start of a secret world, one filled with dreams bigger than she could imagine. Every night she played in silence, unaware that destiny was slowly opening its doors for her. A few weeks later, Maestro Lorenzo announced that he would be hosting a small music event at his mansion. It was meant to showcase the talent of his elite students in front of wealthy guests and famous musicians. The whole mansion buzzed with excitement. Every student wanted to impress the maestro and win his praise. Maria, as always, worked extra hours to make sure everything was spotless for the big day. She polished the floors until they shined and arranged the chairs perfectly. Isabella helped her mother, but her eyes kept drifting toward the grand piano in the center of the hall. She had heard every piece the students were practicing for the event. She could hum all of them by heart. Even without touching the keys, she could imagine how they should sound. But she never told anyone. It was her little secret. On the day of the performance, the mansion filled with laughter, chatter, and the smell of expensive perfume. The guests arrived in elegant dresses and tuxedos, and the maestro stood proudly at the front, greeting them. Isabella stayed quietly at the back, helping her mother serve drinks and arrange the snacks. She wasn't supposed to be seen. She was just the maid's daughter, but her heart raced every time she heard the piano begin. One by one, the students performed. Some played beautifully while others stumbled under the pressure. Every mistake made Isabella's fingers twitch. She wanted so badly to show them how it should sound. During the break, a few of the students noticed her standing near the corner, staring at the piano. One of them, a girl named Sophia, laughed and whispered loudly, "Look, the maid's daughter thinks she can play." The others joined in, smirking. Isabella turned away, embarrassed. Maria saw it too and quickly pulled her daughter aside. "Don't let them bother you, Bella," she whispered. "They don't know who you are inside." Isabella nodded, but her eyes were full of hurt. Then, something unexpected happened. Maestro Lorenzo overheard the teasing. He turned toward Isabella and said in a calm but sharp voice, "If you think you can do better, why don't you come up and play something?" His words echoed through the hall. Everyone turned to look at the little girl in her simple dress, holding a tray. The guests chuckled. The students whispered. Maria froze, her heart pounding. "Maestro, please," Maria began. She didn't mean. But Lorenzo raised his hand to stop her. His eyes were focused on Isabella. "Come," he said again, not angrily but curiously. Isabella's hands trembled. She could feel everyone's eyes on her, waiting for her to make a fool of herself. Her mother shook her head slightly, silently begging her not to do it. But Isabella took a deep breath. Something inside her, maybe courage, maybe destiny, pushed her forward. She walked slowly to the piano. The crowd laughed softly. "This should be interesting," someone whispered. Isabella sat down on the bench. Her feet barely reached the pedals. For a few seconds, she just stared at the keys, her heart beating fast. She remembered every night she had practiced in secret, every melody she had memorized by listening. Then she closed her eyes. The room fell silent. She pressed the first key, a soft, trembling note. Then another, and another. The melody began to form. At first it was gentle, uncertain. But soon, her fear faded away, replaced by something magical. Her fingers moved gracefully, faster, more confidently. The music filled the hall. It was Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Each note was filled with emotion, not perfection, but heart. The laughter stopped. The whispers died. Even the maestro leaned forward, eyes wide in disbelief. The sound seemed to touch something deep inside everyone. The guests felt it. The honesty, the beauty, the soul in her music. This wasn't a performance. It was a story. Isabella didn't have expensive clothes or lessons, but what she had was rare, pure talent. Her small hands moved as if they had been born to play. When the final note faded, silence filled the room. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, a few people began to clap. The applause grew louder and louder until everyone was standing. Maria's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't believe what she had just witnessed. Her daughter had silenced an entire hall of rich, powerful people. Maestro Lorenzo stood still, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but full of respect. "Remarkable," he said. "Truly remarkable." He turned to his students and added, "Remember this moment. Talent can come from anywhere, even from those you choose to overlook." Isabella looked at her mother and smiled shyly. Maria rushed forward and hugged her tightly, whispering, "I'm so proud of you, my little girl." That night, Isabella didn't just play a song. She played her heart. And from that moment, nothing in her life or the maestro's would ever be the same again. The grand hall fell into a deep silence as Isabella sat at the piano. Every eye was on her. Every whisper had stopped. Her heart pounded so loudly she could almost hear it over the stillness. The chandelier lights shimmered above her, and she could see the reflection of the crowd in the shiny black piano surface. Her hands trembled, and for a second, she thought about running away. What was she doing here? She was just a maid's daughter surrounded by rich people who were waiting for her to fail. Then she remembered her mother's face. Tired, kind, and full of love. She remembered how hard Maria worked every day, cleaning other people's messes just to give her a better life. That thought gave her strength. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. Slowly, her fingers touched the keys, and the first soft note filled the hall. It was a simple sound, but it carried emotion. Delicate, gentle, full of innocence. The laughter that had filled the room moments earlier vanished completely. Her fingers moved again, pressing the next notes, this time more confidently. She began to play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, a piece she had memorized simply by listening during the maestro's lessons. The melody started slow and quiet, but soon it grew stronger, like waves rising and falling. At first, people watched out of curiosity, but as she continued, something magical happened. The room seemed to hold its breath. The music spoke to everyone in a way that words could not. It told a story of struggle, of beauty, of hope. Every note she played came straight from her heart. She wasn't thinking about impressing anyone or proving herself. She was simply lost in the music. Maestro Lorenzo, who stood near the front, felt his chest tighten as he listened. He had heard hundreds of students play that same piece, but never like this. Isabella's performance was raw and honest. It wasn't technically perfect. She missed a few notes, but it didn't matter. Each mistake felt human, and every pause carried emotion. She played not with training, but with soul. The audience sat frozen. The sound of the piano filled every corner of the mansion, wrapping everyone in its warmth. Maria stood near the back, clutching her cleaning cloth in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. She had always known her daughter was special, but hearing her play like this felt like witnessing a miracle. Her little girl, the one who practiced silently at night with invisible keys, was now shining in front of everyone. When Isabella reached the middle of the piece, something inside her changed. The fear disappeared completely. Her hands moved gracefully across the piano, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. The music became more intense, more emotional. It was as if she was talking through the piano, telling the story of her life, of being poor, of dreaming, of believing when no one else did. The guests who had once laughed now watched with awe, unable to look away. As the final notes approached, Isabella slowed down. Her fingers moved softly, almost whispering through the keys. The last note lingered in the air, echoing beautifully before fading into silence. And then nothing. The hall was completely still. For several seconds, no one moved or spoke. Even the maestro remained frozen, staring at the young girl who had just performed something unforgettable. Then one person began to clap, a slow, hesitant clap. Then another joined, and then the entire hall erupted into applause. People stood up from their seats, clapping and cheering. Some even shouted, "Bravo!" The sound filled the room louder than any music ever had. Maria covered her mouth, overwhelmed with emotion. She never imagined this moment could happen. Her daughter being celebrated by the same people who once looked down on her. Isabella stood up from the piano bench, her face red with nervousness and disbelief. She looked around, confused by the applause. She had expected anger or at least laughter, but not this. The maestro walked toward her slowly. His eyes, once proud and distant, now looked warm and thoughtful. "That," he said quietly, so everyone could hear, "was real music." He turned to his students and said, "You all have talent, yes? But this girl has something more. Something you can't buy or teach. She plays with her heart." His words silenced the students, who stood with mixed expressions of shame and admiration. Isabella glanced at her mother, who was crying openly now. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, they both knew. This was the moment that would change everything. The same piano that once belonged to others now felt like hers. The girl who had been invisible had finally been seen. That night, as the guests left, they couldn't stop talking about the maid's daughter who played like a prodigy. The story spread quickly, from whispers in the mansion to talk among the city's elite. But Isabella didn't care about fame or praise. She only cared about one thing, that for the first time, she had shared her heart with the world, and the world had listened. When Isabella finished playing, the final note hung in the air like a soft whisper. Then silence. For a few long seconds, no one in the hall moved or spoke. The guests were frozen, unsure of what they had just witnessed. The rich ladies in their jewel dresses blinked in disbelief, and the maestro's students stood stiff, their jaws slightly open. Even Maestro Lorenzo himself, the man who had trained hundreds of gifted students, looked stunned. He had never expected a maid's daughter to play with such emotion, with such beauty that it made people forget to breathe. Then one person in the back began to clap, softly at first. It was one of the maestro's older students. Slowly, others joined in. Soon, the entire hall erupted into applause. The sound filled the room, echoing against the marble walls. Some people even stood up from their seats, clapping with genuine excitement. "Bravo!" shouted one of the guests. "That was extraordinary." Maria, standing at the back of the room, covered her mouth with her trembling hands. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Her daughter, the same little girl who once practiced on invisible keys at home, was now being applauded by the most powerful people in the city. Isabella looked around, dazed. She had never seen so many people clapping for her. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. Maestro Lorenzo slowly walked toward her, his face unreadable. The hall grew quiet again, waiting for his reaction. He stopped beside her and looked down at the piano keys, then at her small hands. "Who taught you to play like that?" he asked in a serious tone. Isabella hesitated, unsure if she was in trouble. "No one, sir," she said softly. "I just listen when you teach your students." The maestro raised his eyebrows. "Just by listening?" he repeated. Isabella nodded nervously. The guests murmured among themselves. It seemed impossible that a child without any lessons could play that well. Lorenzo placed one hand on the piano and took a deep breath. "You played with mistakes," he said finally, and the crowd tensed. But then he added, "And yet, no one in this room could match your heart. That's what makes real music." A wave of emotion passed through the audience. Some of the maestro's students looked embarrassed, lowering their heads. They had spent years studying, but they had never moved their teacher the way Isabella just had. Maria wiped her tears, trying to hide her pride, but it was impossible. Her daughter had done something no one believed she could. After the performance, guests surrounded the maestro, praising the little girl's talent. Some wanted to meet her. Others asked if she was one of his new students. The maestro simply smiled faintly and said, "Not yet." He watched Isabella as she stood beside her mother, holding her hands tightly, still overwhelmed by all the attention. Later that evening, when the guests had gone and the mansion was quiet again, Maestro Lorenzo sat alone in the music room. The piano still seemed to echo with Isabella's melody. He poured himself a cup of tea and stared at the instrument. He had spent his entire life teaching students how to master technique, how to play perfectly, yet none of them had ever played with such honesty. He realized that what Isabella had wasn't something that could be taught. It was a gift, a pure, natural gift that came from deep within her soul. Meanwhile, Maria and Isabella walked home under the soft glow of the streetlights. The night air was cool, and Isabella's heart still raced from the excitement. "Mama," she whispered, "did I do something wrong?" He looked angry. Maria smiled through her tears. "No, my love. You did something wonderful. You showed them your heart. And that is something no one can take away from you." Isabella smiled faintly but didn't say much. She still couldn't believe what had happened. She had sat at that piano expecting to be humiliated, but instead, she had moved an entire room of people. Deep inside, a small spark of hope began to grow. A belief that maybe, just maybe, music could be her future. Back at the mansion, Lorenzo made a quiet decision. He would not let that kind of talent fade away. The next time he saw Isabella, he planned to speak to her, not as a servant's daughter, but as a musician. He wanted to know more about the girl who could play with such emotion, the girl who reminded him why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. That night, neither Isabella nor her mother could sleep. Maria lay awake, thinking about what the future might hold for her daughter, while Isabella replayed every moment of her performance in her mind. The applause, the maestro's eyes, the feeling of the piano keys beneath her hands. All of it felt magical. In that single evening, everything had changed. Isabella was no longer just the maid's daughter. She was something more now. A girl whose music had touched hearts and silenced laughter. The world didn't know her name yet, but the maestro did. And that was the beginning of something beautiful. That night, after everyone had left and the mansion had grown quiet, Maestro Lorenzo couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. He sat alone in his study, staring at the grand piano in the next room. The echoes of Isabella's music still floated in his mind. It was strange. He had heard many performances in his life, from the most talented pianists in the world, yet none of them had touched him the way that little girl's playing had. Her music wasn't perfect, but it was real. It came from a place deep within her heart. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sighed. How could a child with no training play like that? He muttered to himself. For years, he had believed that true mastery came only from discipline, technique, and years of study. But Isabella had just proved him wrong. Her music had emotion, something that even his best students often lacked. The maestro realized he had just witnessed something extraordinary. The next morning, he arrived early at the mansion, hoping to see Maria and Isabella. When they entered to start their work, Isabella looked down shyly, afraid he might be angry. Her small hands clutched the hem of her mother's apron. Maria immediately apologized. "Maestro, I am truly sorry for yesterday," she said nervously. Isabella should not have touched the piano again. She meant no harm. But to her surprise, Lorenzo didn't look angry at all. His expression was calm, even kind. "No harm was done," he said quietly. Then he looked at Isabella. "You have a gift, child. Do you understand that?" Isabella shook her head. "I just like to play," she said softly. Her innocence made him smile. "Who taught you?" he asked again, wanting to be sure. "No one," she replied honestly. "I just listen when you teach the others. And sometimes, I remember." Lorenzo's eyes widened slightly. It was almost unbelievable. Most people trained for years just to understand simple melodies, but she had learned by ear, by feeling. He nodded slowly. "Do you know the name of the piece you played last night?" he asked. "Yes," Isabella said. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Her voice was soft but confident. That answer made Lorenzo's heart tighten. She not only remembered the sound, she even remembered the name. He had never seen such natural understanding in anyone before. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a thoughtful tone, he spoke. Isabella, music is a gift that must be nurtured. But talent alone is not enough. It needs guidance, patience, practice, and discipline. If you are willing to learn, I can teach you. Maria's eyes widened in disbelief. Teach her? She repeated. Maestro, we cannot afford. He raised a hand to stop her. I'm not asking for payment, he said firmly. Her lessons will be free. I do not do this often, but when I see true talent, I cannot ignore it. Tears welled up in Maria's eyes. You would do that for my daughter? She whispered. Lorenzo gave a faint smile. I would do it for music, he said. And because she reminds me of why I fell in love with it in the first place. Isabella stood speechless, not fully understanding how big this moment was. She only knew that the maestro's words made her heart race with excitement. I'll work hard, sir, she promised. I'll never waste your time. And so it began. Every afternoon, after finishing her schoolwork, Isabella stayed behind in the music room. The maestro gave her small lessons, teaching her about rhythm, notes, and hand movement. She learned faster than he expected. Within weeks, she could read simple sheet music. Within months, she could play complex melodies almost flawlessly. But what amazed him most was her emotion. She didn't just copy music. She felt it. Every piece she played carried her soul. Sometimes, the other students watched her from the doorway, whispering among themselves. Some were jealous, others curious. They couldn't understand how a maid's daughter could play better than they could. But Lorenzo didn't care what they thought. For the first time in years, he felt inspired as a teacher again. Late one evening, after a lesson, he asked Isabella to play something without notes. Something from her heart. She closed her eyes and began to play a tune she had created herself. It was soft and emotional, full of innocence and warmth. The maestro listened with his eyes closed, feeling tears sting the corners of his eyes. It had been a long time since music had made him feel this way. When she finished, he said quietly, Do you know why your music is so special? She shook her head. Because you play what you feel, he said. And that is something no book can teach. That night, as Maria and Isabella walked home under the stars, the little girl looked up at her mother and smiled. Mama, do you think I can be a real pianist one day? Maria smiled back, her heart full. My love, you already are one, she whispered. From that day forward, Maestro Lorenzo was no longer just her employer. He became her mentor, her guide, and her biggest believer. The man who once looked down on a maid's daughter now saw her as a gift to the world. And deep inside, he knew that this was only the beginning of Isabella's beautiful journey. Months turned into years, and Isabella's talent bloomed like a flower in spring. She practiced every day under Maestro Lorenzo's careful guidance. The once shy maid's daughter had now become a confident young pianist whose fingers danced across the piano keys with grace and power. Her music carried emotions so deep that even the hardest hearts in the audience softened when she played. Lorenzo was proud of her, prouder than he had ever been of any student before. He often found himself sitting quietly at the back of the music room, watching her play, thinking how fate had brought her into his life. He knew the world needed to hear her, and it was time to show everyone what she could do. So one morning he called Maria and Isabella into his office. Isabella, he began gently, there will be a grand concert in the city next month. The best young pianists from around the country will perform. I want you to be one of them. Isabella froze. Her eyes widened with disbelief. Me? But Maestro, I'm not like them. They all study in big schools. They wear beautiful dresses and live in mansions. Lorenzo smiled warmly. And yet, none of them play with the heart that you have. Music is not about where you come from, Isabella. It's about what you give to it. Maria's heart filled with both pride and fear. But Maestro, she said softly, People will laugh if they find out who she is. Let them laugh, Lorenzo replied firmly. They laughed once before, remember? But then they listened and they were silent. This time will be no different. And so the preparations began. Lorenzo arranged for Isabella to have extra lessons. He made her practice difficult pieces day and night until she could play them without a single mistake. He even arranged for her to have a simple but elegant dress for the performance. Maria worked extra hours just to buy Isabella a pair of shoes that matched. It wasn't much, but to them it meant everything. The night of the concert finally arrived. The grand hall was packed with musicians, critics, and wealthy guests. Glittering chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the soft murmur of conversation filled the air. Maria sat nervously in the back row, her hands clutching her purse tightly. She had never been to a place like this before. When Isabella's name was announced, a few people in the audience whispered. Some recognized her as the maid's daughter who worked at the Maestro's house. A few even chuckled under their breath. But Isabella didn't let it shake her. She took a deep breath, walked confidently to the piano, and sat down. For a moment there was silence. Then her fingers began to move. The first notes filled the air like soft rain, and soon the entire hall grew still. Every sound, every vibration, carried her emotions. She played not just with skill but with soul. Her music told a story of dreams, struggles, and hope. It was pure, honest, and full of heart. The audience was mesmerized. Even the critics who had come ready to judge sat in stunned silence. Maestro Lorenzo watched with tears glistening in his eyes. He had known she was good, but this was beyond even his expectations. She wasn't just playing music, she was living it. When the final note faded, there was a long, breathless pause. Then, the audience erupted into applause. People stood up from their seats, cheering and clapping. Some shouted bravo. Others simply wiped away their tears. Maria covered her mouth, crying silently as she watched her little girl take a bow. The same people who once mocked her now couldn't stop praising her. Journalists rushed forward, asking questions. Music teachers whispered among themselves, wondering how such talent could come from a girl with no formal training. And through it all, Isabella remained humble. She simply smiled and said, "I just played what I felt." After the performance, Maestro Lorenzo walked up to her and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "You did it, Isabella," he said proudly. "You didn't just play music tonight. You touched hearts. That is what true art is." She smiled up at him with shining eyes. "Thank you, Maestro, for believing in me when no one else did." That night, as Maria and Isabella walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, Maria looked at her daughter with pride she could hardly contain. "You've made everyone proud, my love," she said. Isabella smiled and took her mother's hand. "I just wanted them to know that it doesn't matter where you come from," she said softly. "What matters is what you carry inside." And somewhere in the distance, the sound of applause still echoed in their hearts. Not for fame, not for wealth, but for a girl who dared to dream and played her truth for the whole world to hear. The morning after the concert, the city was buzzing with news of the mysterious young pianist who had left everyone speechless. Newspapers printed headlines like, "Unknown girl stuns the audience with soulful piano performance," and "From Maid's daughter to musical prodigy." People wanted to know who she was, where she came from, and how someone with no professional training could perform with such emotion and skill. At Maestro Lorenzo's mansion, phone calls poured in from music academies, reporters, and even famous conductors. Everyone wanted to meet the girl who had touched the hearts of hundreds in a single night. Lorenzo, sitting at his desk with a proud smile, knew that Isabella's life had just changed forever. Maria, on the other hand, was still in disbelief. She watched her daughter sitting by the window, softly humming the melody she played the night before. "Isabella," she said with tears in her eyes, "you made the world listen. Do you know what that means?" Isabella smiled shyly. "I didn't mean to make the world listen, Mama," she said. "I just wanted them to feel what I felt." Soon, Maestro Lorenzo entered the room, holding a letter. "Isabella," he said, "you've been invited to perform at the National Music Festival next month. This is one of the biggest honors for any musician. Great pianists from all over the world perform there. They want you to be part of it. Maria gasped. The national festival? But Maestro, that's incredible. Lorenzo nodded proudly. Yes, Maria. And it's because your daughter isn't just talented. She's extraordinary. She plays with a heart that no school can teach. For the next few weeks, Isabella practiced day and night. Lorenzo trained her tirelessly, helping her polish every note. Sometimes he would stop her mid-song, close his eyes and say, "Feel it more, Isabella. Don't just play the notes. Tell a story." She understood. She always did. Finally, the big day arrived. The National Music Festival was held in the capital city, in a massive concert hall filled with thousands of people. Famous musicians, critics, and even government officials were in the audience. Maria sat in the front row, her heart racing with pride and nervousness. When Isabella's name was announced, a quiet hush filled the hall. She walked to the grand piano gracefully, wearing a simple white dress. There were no fancy jewels or expensive gowns, only a young girl with pure passion in her heart. She took a deep breath and began to play. The sound that came from the piano was unlike anything the audience had ever heard. It was soft yet powerful, filled with emotion and beauty. The music seemed to paint pictures of struggle, hope, and love. Each note carried her story, a story of a maid's daughter who had dreamed beyond her world. The audience sat completely still, as if afraid that even a breath might disturb the magic flowing through the room. Maestro Lorenzo stood backstage, watching with tears in his eyes. He had taught her how to play, but she had taught him something even greater, the true meaning of music. When Isabella finished, the hall erupted into thunderous applause. People stood up, clapping and cheering. Some shouted her name, while others cried openly, moved by the sincerity in her music. Judges exchanged glances, clearly impressed beyond words. Moments later, the host returned to the stage and announced the result. And the winner of this year's National Music Festival is Isabella Moretti. Maria burst into tears, unable to believe what she was hearing. The entire hall rose to their feet again as Isabella accepted her trophy, her hands trembling slightly. She looked out at the crowd, her eyes landing on her mother, the woman who had believed in her when no one else did, and on Maestro Lorenzo, who had given her wings to fly. After the ceremony, reporters surrounded her, asking endless questions. One of them said, "You've become a sensation overnight. What's your secret?" Isabella smiled softly and replied, "There's no secret. My music is my story. I just play what my heart wants to say." That answer melted everyone's hearts. Her humility, her kindness, and her grace became as admired as her talent. Offers began to pour in from famous music schools and international concert organizers. But Isabella didn't rush to accept them. She wanted to keep learning, to stay true to the music that had brought her here. Later that night, as they walked home under the same stars that had watched over them since her childhood, Maria said, "You've made your dream come true, my love." Isabella looked at her and smiled. "No, Mama," she said softly. "Our dream came true." Maestro Lorenzo, walking a few steps behind, smiled to himself. He knew this was only the beginning of her journey. The little girl who once listened secretly from behind the doors of his music room had now become a symbol of hope, proof that true talent can come from the most unexpected places. And though the world now called her a prodigy, Isabella remained the same humble girl who loved her mother deeply and believed that music was not about fame or fortune. It was about touching hearts. And that's exactly what she continued to do, one beautiful melody at a time.